Welcome back to another episode of Trucker Talk Radio, Behind the Wheelhouse. You're on with J&J. I'm John. This is Justin. Today's guest, Justin Martin, is the founder of Shady Freight, has built a following by calling out problems most people avoid in the industry. Justin, welcome to the show. How are you?
Oh, well, thanks for having me, guys. Got the
Good.
three J's on today.
That's right.
Three J's. I like that. And members of the BMC. You know what that is?
What's that?
Bald Men's Club.
Oh, yeah.
That's right.
There's a lot of us bald kings in the supply chain for sure.
That's
Exactly.
exactly right. Yep. The
Yep,
light shines off our head real well. We got the glow.
It'll do it in this industry
I
for
had to close the curtain in this RV because it's so shiny.
That's right. So Shady Freight does independent analysis and investigation of fraud, compliance failures, and systemic dysfunction in the trucking and freight industry. Correct, Justin? So go into that a little bit. Talk about your background.
My start was what you would typically consider like a fairly standard entry into the industry. I started at Schneider National. I got my CDL through them, Green Bay, Wisconsin, back in 2007. Stayed with them for a year and a half to pay off my debt, and then moved back to Florida. And it was like the worst possible timing because it was right in the middle of the housing crash. Everybody was getting laid off. It was awful.
Mhm.
I worked for a little bit for an owner operator, so I went from like one end of the extreme spectrum, working for a mega carrier, to like a independent guy. So I went from being just a number to having to fight tooth and nail for every paycheck, and that was miserable. Worked at Target for a bit, stocking the freezers there because no one liked work. It's Florida. No one liked being in the cold. I was like, I love being in the cold, so I'll do that. And really didn't know if I was ever going to get back in the truck. And this dream job basically landed in my lap. A guy I went to high school with, his dad drove for a DoD contractor called Green Valley Transportation out of Tracy,
Okay.
California. And their entire fleet is all teens. And his dad was driving with a guy who wanted to split off and go drive with his wife. So his dad needed a new co-driver. He reached out to me. Met with his dad over a couple beers at a bar in Lake Worth, Florida, and we got along real well. And I had a great time working for that company. DoD Freight is the very definition of don't touch. You don't look at the stuff. They put it all in the truck for you. They take it off for you. It was all 1.1 to 1.4 hazmat. Did that for 2 years with that guy, Charles. And then I brought my dad on to drive with me. He was looking to get back into driving. So I said, come drive with me. My dad's retired Air Force. So it was much easier getting on and off bases. So after 4 years of doing that, I was like, okay, I'm kind of done with this over the road stuff. Tired of living out of a suitcase. So moved to
Right.
Philadelphia, got a couple local gigs, and eventually found my way into hauling mail for a mail contractor. They were called Pat Solomon and Sons at the time. They were the largest mail contractor in the country. They eventually merged with a bunch of other mail contractors to become TenRoads. And by then, TenRoads was like 10% more than that of the entire contractor network at USPS. And just of January this year, they no longer exist. So I got to witness
Really?
pretty much everything that we're seeing on like the shady side of the market right now, military contract stuff, and a lot of the non-domicile issues we're seeing in the mail right now. I got to witness that all firsthand. After I kept applying again and again and again, USPS finally hired me as a driver in 2017. By 2020, I was a transportation supervisor there for a bit, and I was there during COVID, like the big COVID rush. And I got to witness how we switched from direct contract model to brokered freight, and just what a disaster that has been over the last couple of years. After USPS, I saw this post on Twitter by Dooner at FreightWaves saying that they were looking to hire a couple truck drivers to run a website that they were launching. It was remote work from home, so I was like, "Hey, I got a 2-year-old at home. That sounds like a good job for me."
Yeah.
That's kind of
Yeah. It's
how
a
I.
good opportunity to get out of the truck.
perfect.
Yeah, that was my springboard from getting out of the truck to really into the greater supply chain in general. Because most of the stuff I've been doing, I was very insulated from a lot of the bigger problems. I never had to broker freight. I wasn't owner operator. I was kind of shielded from many of the problems that people are dealing with every day in the supply chain. But during my time at FreightWaves, I had to learn a bunch. You talk to a bunch of people. You could be entirely self-focused on like one area of expertise and miss 99.9% of everything else that goes on in the industry. So it was
Right.
it was a lot of like catching up to do to really understand everything that was going on.
How'd you get into Shady Freight?
During my time at FreightWaves, Craig announced that they were going to start merging all of his properties together that he owned. So it was going to be like
Mhm.
the FreightWaves side, all the boat publications, this, and that, and they were going to merge it into one company called Fire Crown Media. and their plan for me was to move me from trucking over to boats. I was like, I don't know anything about boats. So a friend of mine was launching a social media consulting marketing startup at the same time. So I
Okay.
left and went to work with him. And I've just been doing freelance for like the last 2.5 years. The origin of Shady Freight came about from my friend Garrett Allen. He launched a site called searchcarriers.com about a year and a half ago. And he wanted to have me, our friend Daniel Chaffin, and some others kind of stress test the site and see whether or not it would be useful to people out there. And what's great about working with Garrett on that is I'll be working on something or Danielle will be working on something, and we're like, man, this is like really manual. Like it's kind of a pain in the butt. Is there any way we can like simplify this process or automate it or make it just one click? And so we'll bounce those ideas off of Garrett, and he's got it like the next day. And so Shady Freight was originally going to be a podcast that Danielle and I and some others were going to do involving a bunch of carriers that we were looking into. And the more we dug into the people running the companies and their criminal activities and stuff, we began to realize like, oh, these are actually like really scary dudes. And we probably shouldn't be naming them publicly, like with our names and faces involved. So any activity we find like that, we just forward it off to law enforcement. And
Uh-huh.
over the last year of just constantly calling out stuff that we see and problems that people are reporting to us, it coincided with like at the same time there were all these high profile wrecks, fatality wrecks happening on the highways involving you know, various immigrant truck drivers. And it was like the perfect storm of like, okay, we've been screeching about this for 2 years. The public is finally starting to notice. And so we changed the conversation from instead of everybody in the industry talking amongst each other about problems we all know, we face the conversation outwards to the public. Because everyone's asking, like, how the hell do we have illegal immigrants driving, 18 wheelers on the highways? And we're like, oh,
Right.
we can explain that easily. And I have conversations at least once or twice a week with journalists, government staffers, their bosses, and everyone is just blown away at how nobody really paid attention to anything that was going on. All this stuff really just kind of happened under the surface. And these are problems that have been existing for well over 20 years now, but they've kind of accelerated due to a handful of policies handed out starting around 2016, 2017. And so that's kind of why things are a mess today.
Well, if you don't mind, for our listeners that might not understand that just see it on social media, you're 100% right. I say this all the time. I actually said this to Jonathan a couple hours ago. The wreck that happened in Florida with the U-turn with the minivan, worst best thing that happened to the industry.
100%.
Probably say that till the day I die. It's a sad situation, but it finally brought some light to an issue that only, as you just even said, we all talked amongst ourselves in the industry, but it was never brought out to the media. And I say for forever, Americans don't understand trucking. Just the average Joe don't understand. They don't realize that everything in their house comes from a truck driver and how important the industry is. But could you elaborate a little bit for the listeners who don't, really understand? They just know, hey, it's illegal in the truck. Can you explain exactly kind of what happened and why we're where we're at in a more layman's term for those who are just trying to learn and figure it out? Because me and John, we're a part of Ready Up, and we're trying to fix verifying drivers, and I think that's something that definitely needs to happen in the country. We verify airplane, pilots and things of that nature. Well, there's more trucks than anything else on the road. So, can you just go into that a little bit for us?
Sure. Yeah. The greatest trick the supply chain ever pulled was convincing people it doesn't exist. You talk to most people and they just assume food comes from the grocery store. They don't understand that
Hmm.
pressing a button on that app and getting that package to your door within a couple hours or the next day, there is an entire army of thousands of invisible people behind that to make that possible. And the industry, trucking itself specifically, has been dealing with insane turnover since 1980 when the entire industry was deregulated. And the consequences of that are anyone with a pulse, regardless of their legal status in the country, can start a trucking company. You could be a guy living in France right now with a laptop and $300 in your pocket, and you could start a trucking company. So it kicked off this wave of people constantly coming into the industry lying forever about a truck driver shortage. And what the people pushing that narrative didn't anticipate was a lot of the drivers that they were importing from overseas would come here, stick around, learn how the industry works, and then open their own trucking companies, and then start importing the drivers they wanted. Nobody saw that coming. The theory was, well, we're just going to have taxpayers pay for infinite truck driver training, and we'll just never run out of drivers. And that was not the case. Instead, we have way more drivers than we know what to do with. Rates crash as a result. And only just this year, with like the little bit of enforcement that we've done, have we actually seen any kind of improvement in the market.
So are you seeing the average broker or carrier, truly understand the level of risk they're dealing with?
Not the broker side is interesting because just like with drivers, there's like insane turnover in brokerages.
Right.
Most of your brokers today that are operating haven't been in the industry more than 5-10 years. So they're not used to seeing a market like this before. The market has almost always been in the broker's favor. The broker, you just pick up a phone, get a truck instantly, book a load, and then collect their margin on it. It's getting a lot harder today, especially brokers that relied on many of these like more shady operators. Like if you got a load going from one coast to the other and the customer wants it in 2.5 days, but they're only going to pay a solo driver rate, it's got to be harder to find drivers willing to do that these days. Most of those guys are starting to get flushed out. I think part of why the public is really starting to catch on to how bad things have gotten is most of these high profile wrecks, like the one in Florida, that was all on video. Even before that wreck in Florida, there were 2 previous wrecks the month before and the month before that in Texas, where even more people were killed. And there was a little bit of media buzz on that, but because the accident wasn't captured on video, it was almost completely forgotten about. The one case, Terrell, Texas, involving a carrier called Hope Trans LLC, they were like textbook definition Chameleon carrier. This was like their 3rd or 4th company they had operated. They changed names repeatedly. The load itself, it was contracted out to Covenant out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. Covenant, for whatever reason, didn't have a driver to cover that load, so they subcontracted it out to a carrier called Hope Trans LLC. The scam that Hope Trans was running was that any driver at any point could text their dispatcher, "I need coffee," and then they would reset the hours on their ELD. That is something that should have like just nuked that carrier on the spot. Once the FMCSA came in and they started their investigation, as soon as they discovered that, they should have just issued a emergency, what do they call it, a imminent hazard shutdown notice. And instead, what they did was they sent them a letter saying, "You have 60 days to fix this problem, or then we're going to issue an imminent hazard shutdown." So, and that was before Derek Bars came in. We have completely new leadership at FMCSA today, and they're not doing that anymore. I think having a guy with a law enforcement background is going to completely change the attitude and makeup of that agency going forward. And I hope he sticks around. Most leaders at FMCSA, their tenure is only like 6 months to a year. They have constant rotation there.
Why do you think that is? Is it because of the pressure and the pushback that you get, or
It's a thankless job. Your first day on the job,
that's true?
You get like
Enemy number one.
you get like a 10,000-foot view of like all the problems you got to deal with, and you got to be like, okay, if I take it upon myself to fix this stuff and I don't fix anything, I'm the bad guy. But if I just coast through this job, collect as many contacts as I can. Oh, here's what I like to do. Go on Wikipedia, search up FMCSA, and they have this table of like every person in the leadership position there for the last 20 years. Punch every one of those names into LinkedIn and see where those guys are all working now. It's all advisory boards for autonomous trucking companies, Washington, D.C. think tanks, lobbyist groups. Like, so the whole point of that job until this new guy Bars came in, it was just a revolving door. You come in, you make a bunch of contacts, and then you get a cushy job in the civilian side. And because of that, so much stuff that they were responsible for never got fixed before it became a massive problem like we see today.
We talked earlier about you driving, in a truck that had AI. I want to get your thoughts on where we're going over the next 5 to 10 years. We talked about it earlier. A lot of people think autonomous trucks are the next thing. Drivers are getting concerned. Where do you see us going with AI and autonomous trucks?
It's really impossible to predict because the timelines that everyone has been predicting has always been, 6 months, 6 months, 6 months. But that's going back 10 plus years. If you go back 10 years, there were over 30 autonomous trucking startups in the country. And I think as of today, there's like maybe 5. So they've all gone bankrupt and knowingly or unknowingly completely misdiagnosed the problem. If you read what they publish and what they tell their investors and the media, they're here to solve a truck driver shortage. And they're finding out the hard way that there absolutely is not one in the United States. The whole point of automation is you're trying to put something out there that can do the job cheaper than a human being. And it's sad to say, but like thanks to all this lobbying over the last couple of decades of like flooding in so many guys into the industry, the rate for moving freight, it really isn't that bad for a human.
The rates really haven't changed. I've been doing this for 20 years. I mean, the rates haven't changed in the last 20 years.
Yeah, and when you're an AI company, the amount of money you have to burn in order to train a model that can do maybe 60 to 70% of the job that a human can do, you got to recoup those costs. None of this stuff is
Right.
free. So my theory is that we're still going to see another couple generations of bankruptcies because right now the current business plan for all these companies is spend a gazillion dollars, hunker down for a year or two, pray you get bought out for $4 gazillion so that you can recoup your costs. And it's just
Right.
not happening. Instead,
Yeah.
these companies spend all this money, they go bankrupt, and then a competitor snatches them up for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah, I just don't see drivers getting out of trucks. I just, for quite some time, I don't think we have the infrastructure for it. I don't think we know what we're getting into. I mean, talk about some of the fraud that we're going to see
Hmm.
if drivers are out of trucks. You talked about it earlier. I mean, like people getting into trucks and pulling packages out, these unmanned trucks. I mean, you got to have somebody in there.
So when I worked at the post office, your typical letter carrier, the truck driver, none of these guys are armed. The way that they
Right.
deter criminal scumbags is if you go around the back end of any post office, there's a gigantic sign saying, "This is what's going to happen to you if you mess with a letter carrier, if you mess with a mail." It's like hundreds of thousands of dollars, decades in jail, that kind of stuff. So it's the threat of every
Mhm.
like government agency that's going to go after you if you were stupid enough to mess with a letter carrier. We don't have that in trucking. If a load gets stolen because a guy cloned your truck or they intercepted your bill of lading or they hacked into your TMS system and now they have your entire network mapped out, even if they're caught, law enforcement is just like, we don't, there's not a bomb in the truck and the guy's not a serial killer. We don't, it's not our problem. It's a civil matter. When you see a truck going down the highway and there's a person behind the wheel and you want to steal that load, you have to weigh the cost benefit of like, do I take that driver out to steal his load? Do I wait for him to park and then leave? But if there's no person in the truck, there's absolutely if you have no qualms about stealing something, you're just going to get in front of that truck, box it in, pull it off to the side of the road, break open the seal on that trailer, and pilfer everything that you can.
That's true. It just makes it too easy, and of course we've been saying this for a long time, and especially the fight that we've been doing in the industry. The criminals are getting smarter all the time. They're
Always.
just like AI. They're always learning something a little bit new. And if you give them a playing field that they take the human element out of, so they don't have any really risk in the beginning of it anyway, yeah, it's just gonna to feed that fuel. I want to ask you, besides the non-CDL drivers and stuff, with your research, what's the next biggest issue you've seen with these carriers? Is it double brokering? Is it the foreign companies coming in and having multiple MC numbers? What's the next one that maybe is not talked about as much that you've seen?
Definitely the foreign ownership. Most of the focus on the current administration right now is going after the drivers, which I applaud. That needs to happen. But we also have zero barriers to entry as far as who can own and operate a trucking company in the US. Zero testing, training, knowledge whatsoever. You can just go on to your local, if you live in, so I live in New Jersey, you go to nj.gov, file some paperwork, form an LLC, take that information to irs.gov, tell them I'm opening up a motor carrier. Here's my MC number, and $300, you've got a trucking company. If and when these guys are caught, they shut down and they just either reopen under a new name or they already have multiple companies in their back pocket that they've been aging for the last year, and they just keep going. So this is what we've been lobbying the current administration. There needs to be a chameleon carrier task force to go out there and actually work not just within DOT and FMCSA, but with other agencies to shut these guys down. Because just like how we didn't put Al Capone away for all the booze he smuggled or all the
Mhm.
people he murdered. It was the IRS
Yep,
who went after him. He wasn't paying
Right.
his taxes.
that's right.
And then just like how these companies operate, if I'm a legitimate US trucking company and I have employee drivers driving for me, it is my truck, my fuel, my insurance, my tires, my maintenance that I'm paying for. So I got to run these guys profitably to try and recoup those costs. the way these chameleon carriers operate is they, as soon as that driver enters the US, they immediately make them form their own LLC, and they don't hire that driver. They contract out to that LLC. So they charge the LLC for the truck. They charge him for the fuel. They charge him for the insurance. So it's a completely opposite relationship versus like legitimate US companies right now. And that's why we've seen that in the combination of just less freight to haul around right now. That's why we're seeing so many bankruptcies amongst, multi-generation legacy carriers who have gone through multiple freight cycles, who know what they're doing, but they just can't compete against these guys because they're not playing by the rules. They have ELDs in the trucks that can run their drivers 24/7. It's a completely unfair system.
But we've talked about it. John's wife is in real estate. For you to be a broker, have your own brokerage and have your own real estate company, you've got to go through the steps of being a real
Hmm.
estate agent. Then you got to take a brokerage class to be able to own your own thing. Yeah, I mean, and there's nothing
Everything
dangerous,
is verified, right? I mean,
right?
you gotta have continuing ed. You have
Got to go back to
a
TIS.
realtor profile. Everyone can see who you are before before you're able to show a house.
And it gets worse because when you go through the DOT database and you search by the registered officers of the companies and you type in no name given or name unknown, there
Hmm.
are tens of thousands of trucking companies out there with either the first or last name as unknown. And sure, I get it. A lot of these guys, they come from, cultures that have only one name, and that's fine. But in states like California, you can look up their business records and see most of these companies that get founded, they'll register as no name given Sing or Sing no name given. But then you go back 6 months later and you'll see them change the business filing, and they'll actually have a first name or a last name added on later.
So not only do we not know who owns the company, we don't know who started the LLC, but we also
Exactly.
don't know who's behind the wheel. We don't know who these guys are hiring.
And it's not like they're running barbershops. To be a barber, depending what state you're in, it's last I checked, it's 1,800 hours of classes that
Hmm.
you have to go through just to cut hair. But if you want to drive an 80,000 pound commercial vehicle hauling who knows what, nothing,
Right.
no barrier whatsoever. And I'm not
Right.
arguing that we need to go back to like the pre 1980 days of regulation. I'm saying that we overcorrected for the problems that we were having pre 1980, and there needs to be just a little bit of a pullback, saying, okay, if you want to be a driver, here's what you got to do. If you want to be a owner of a motor carrier, here's what you need to do, and prove to us that you actually know what you're doing.
Yeah, until there's real verification, real identity, real accountability, none of this changes, right?
Yeah, and they're putting forward like new rules and stuff going forward. They have a new system called Modus, I think it's called, at DOT. So anyone starting a new trucking company, you have to have like a facial recognition scan, all this stuff. Great, but that does nothing for the 500,000 trucking companies that already exist.
Mm.
It's
Right.
you have to go through, and there we've talked with Derek Bars and his team over there. So one of the first things they're doing is address matching. When you look at the database and you realize, oh, this one apartment complex has 87 trucking companies all registered there. What the hell is up with that? So they're sending letters out to any addresses that have multiple MCs registered there, and they're only giving them 48 hours. They said you need to respond back to us within 48 hours and prove that you are who you are, and either update your info, tell us where your trucks really are parked, who you really are, and if they don't respond within 48 hours, their authority shut down.
I think part of it is a technology problem. I mean,
Yeah.
we're really 10 years behind. That's what we talk about at Ready App. That's what we're doing there. We're talking to a Florida state senator later today about really addressing this problem of identity and verification and making sure that the carrier also validates that these drivers are indeed authorized to run under their authority and making sure that those drivers are verified not only at the time of booking the load or even pre-booking the load, but all the way through delivery and knowing who actually handled that load at the time after delivery.
Hmm.
There's a true verification process that is followed on every single load, and it doesn't need to be that complex. It's a simple piece of technology that can really, make a difference.
Yeah, we're never going to get the government to run at the same speed as these criminals. I've been saying for a while that the FMCSA is a fax machine in the era of like
Mhm.
real time satellite communication, And
Right.
I did a panel in Chicago a couple years back, and one of the people on there was a guy from FedEx. And I was actually very surprised at some of the tech that FedEx had been looking into. So on the crypto blockchain side, one thing that they were looking into was it was a blockchain, but they had their own term for it. They call it the hyper ledger, which I was like, oh, that's a great name. But it was going to
Mhm.
be like a permanent record of every single thing they'd ever moved. So if you are a broker carrier or even like the final consumer, you know, put your thinking cap on 50 years from now. Here's what I imagine things look like. You are a conscious consumer shopper and you only want to buy produce, sourced locally here within the US. You go to your grocery store, every single item on the shelf is technically a node on the blockchain, and either through glasses or an app on your phone or whatever, you can scan whatever you're picking up and it can tell you exactly where it came from, who hauled it, who they hauled it for, and then where
Mhm.
exactly it originated from. Right now, it's kind of it's too opaque, and we see it a lot with trucking accidents right now. If a plane goes down and there are injuries or fatalities, we know like the blood type of the pilots within a couple days.
Absolutely. Yeah.
With
That's right.
trucks, we don't know who the driver was. We don't know who. Like, there's a wreck right now in Chattanooga that's got I-65 shut down. We have no idea what carriers were involved, who the drivers were, what they were hauling, who brokered that load, and who the shipper was.
Probably who brokered that load doesn't know who the driver is because
Yep.
that carrier's double
Mhm.
brokered it to another
Yep.
carrier, and then they've
Yep.
got another driver on who got sick, and then some other driver went and hauled it.
And that's
Absolutely.
that's something that brokers always try to like use as a shield of like when they have a shipper and they say I got 20 loads of sneakers I need moved, and they're trying to figure out what carriers to hire and whatnot. The brokers don't hire the drivers; they contract to the carrier, and it's up to the carrier to hire that driver. So having some kind of system in place, and I assume that's what you guys are doing with your Ready app is if I'm booking a carrier, I need to know without violating all kinds of privacy laws, exactly
Right.
that they're hiring legit drivers. And I see guys like you and other tech platforms coming online as a good way of like trying to mitigate those risks. I don't think brokers are 100% liable for like if I hire a carrier and turns out oh these are some shady guys, they get to a wreck and they kill somebody, trying to figure out who exactly is responsible, like what percentages. I don't think any party is like 100% responsible, other than the driver is always responsible. But the shield that brokers are
Right.
trying to say now is like we have absolutely nothing to do with it. I was like, that's not necessarily true. You guys
You
spend,
still need to know. You
They
yeah,
got
still
a
need to know.
head. Mhm.
You can't just put a blindfold on and not and pretend it doesn't exist. And the brokers that we're talking to is saying we can't afford not to know. I mean,
yeah,
Mhm.
it's important information, and eventually as this technology improves, we can't afford not to know. We can't afford to just turn our heads the other way.
yeah. And brokers spend, depending on the size of them, anywhere from hundreds to hundreds of thousands of dollars per month on carrier vetting software. But it's not necessarily for trying to find safe carriers. They're worried about the freight being stolen.
Right.
Mhm.
If I hire a carrier and they get into a wreck, the insurance, hopefully, knock on wood, covers that cost. But if they steal that load, I'm eating that. So
Right.
yeah, I don't buy the excuse that brokers are
Well, no, I
not
mean,
Right.
there
liable at
are
all.
brokers out there that will not give you, they won't give you load information until they know who the driver is, until they've
Yeah,
Mhm.
spoken with the driver. So to say that you don't need to know anything about the driver is not true because
Yep.
when that carrier goes to book a load, if they don't get the driver information, they're not giving you the load.
I don't understand why they fight this so hard because you know you, you as a broker, you want to know that if I'm booking a carrier, I don't have to worry about this kind of stuff. So
Exactly.
stop fighting with people saying like I don't want to be liable for this or liable for that.
How much more valuable also do you become to your shipper? You know,
Yes,
Mhm.
you
yes,
become to you come to your customer if you know and you
Yep.
can track that driver from pre-booking all the way through delivery. And then if there's an issue with that load, you know who the driver was on that truck, not just the carrier, but you know
yep.
who the driver was behind that truck. You have all of his shared information that the driver also controls that he shares. I don't know why the broker wouldn't want to have access. They do want to have access, but they don't want the liability.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. They're trained from day one. Like, don't ask too many questions. If the driver is
Mhm.
tired, don't acknowledge it because
Yeah.
God forbid something happens with that
Exactly.
load when it goes through the discovery process. Like all that information is going to come out, and that the
Mhm.
lawyers love finding that kind
Yeah.
of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, it used
But
to be, right? It used to be the brokers pushing the drivers, before as the ELDs were just starting to come out.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
then the drivers were like, I get to use this as my excuse not to deliver on time, like, oh, my clock ran out.
Yeah, a lot of drivers were. I understand they were against the ELD mandate and stuff when it first came out, but what they don't realize is like the spot market average like jumped like 10% because it
Yeah.
flushed so much. When I started, it was all paper logs, and everybody had to do what they had to do to make your numbers look accurate on paper. If you're going from Ohio up through Chicago and then out to Minnesota, and you hit traffic in Chicago, you might have only done 450 miles that day, but it probably took you 11, 12 hours to do it. So you truncate your hours. You can't do that with ELDs, or at least you couldn't until all these malicious ELDs came into the market. Oh, that's another thing I want to mention to you guys. So from January 1st to today, the FMCSA has received over 400 applications for new ELD providers, and they've denied every single one of them. And it shows
Wow.
you how
Wow.
desperate these guys are getting, because this is how they operate. The FMCSA is going through right now, one by one, going through and recertifying every single ELD out there. And if they find one that can be manipulated or whatever, they shut them down.
So say this again. There are over 400 new companies coming out there trying to be ELD providers, and the FMCSA has denied them.
Every single one of them. Yep.
Wow.
And that's because they're able to be manipulated.
Yes. Yes. That's how all these carriers operate. If you're a shady carrier in Chicago, you have, at least on paper, your terminal in Chicago, but your brokerages are in Serbia, and your software company is in Uzbekistan, and then your dispatchers are in Moldova. That's the entire network right there. And
Network. Yep.
the ELDs, a lot of them, it's basically like three or four of them, but they just reskin them over and over again. Someone on Twitter did this really cool screenshot of like 8 different ELD providers, but it's like literally the same app. It's like this one's blue, this one's red, this one's orange, this one's gray. It's just the
Mhm.
same. It's the same software over and over again, and that is how these guys operate. It's how they're able to run solo drivers 24/7. And as soon as you start taking those tools away from them, they can't compete with legitimate carriers that have superior quality of service. They got where they are because they can run cheaper, and that's how they were
Right.
gobbling up market share. But when you have a guy that started with one truck in 2017 and then expanded to 500 trucks in 2 years, like, red flags abundant right there. That just does not happen.
No.
Right. Well, the insurance companies don't allow it to happen.
That's
Yeah.
that's another thing. Is the insurance companies, I think, are a big piece of this too. The only way I've ever seen a Chameleon carrier network actually get shut down is when the insurance company cancels their policy. If you have your authority revoked, you have until the end of that date to keep hauling freight. And doesn't matter your safety record, doesn't matter what you've been caught doing, someone is going to book you freight as long as there's insurance on there. And as soon as you lose your insurance policy, you're radioactive. No one wants anything to do with you. So I'm trying. Part of what we're trying to do with Shady Freight is also work with insurance companies and at least give them leads on, say, hey, there's a carrier in the news. They caused this wreck. You are their insurance provider. Here's their entire Chameleon network. You guys can verify this stuff yourself. And so far, we've received pretty much like zero response from the insurance
Yeah. I
companies.
was I was fixing to ask what, even besides insurance companies, have you had any sector be a response to your information that you're giving, or is everybody just kind of like, hey, I don't want to put my head in the sand and not know about it?
Mostly, it's been other carriers that have come to us. So my background being in the DoD freight stuff, we had two guys from a DoD contract carrier come to us with a bunch of receipts on fraud that they had been seeing. And I had heard rumors for years of, like, sneaky stuff happening. And I didn't want to believe it because I knew
Right.
how hard it was to get your hands on this kind of freight. And I just didn't want to believe it. But when not just two drivers, two like executives come to you and they say, we have, this is what we're seeing. We did this huge presentation in front of our trans. We showed receipts and it all fell on deaf ears. We want you guys to go public with it. So Danielle and I spent a few months going through and just re-verifying everything that they found. We found more stuff too. I'll give you one example. So there's a guy in Kenya. He owns a trucking company in the United States. It's a pickup truck, one hotshot pickup truck, and he has been given, I think it was 200 loads within like a 90-day period. And he also has a brokerage authority too. And so this kind of freight is it's called 675 signature and tally freight. So it's stuff like tanks, MRAPs, personnel equipment, that kind of stuff. So not like explosives or hazmat, thank God. But it says on the contract explicitly, like this cannot be brokered out. This is a direct contract. So if you are ABC Trucking, it has to be ABC Trucking that picks it up and
Mhm.
delivers it. And instead, ABC Trucking books 500 loads and then brokers it out to any other carriers out there. Why the Department of War now, not defense, why the Department of War isn't taking this more seriously, I don't know. We've been trying through back channels to get higher ups to take this a little more seriously because what they don't realize is most of these carriers, for now at least, aren't stupid enough to try and steal the freight or manipulate it in some way. They just want to haul it. It's easy freight,
Yeah.
it pays well,
Mhm.
and it never runs out. But that's always step one, is just getting your hands on this freight. Step two is going to be, okay, instead of delivering it to this place, we need to figure out how to get it to where we want it to go. And I would rather prevent step two from
Yeah.
ever happening. Just the idea that you have a guy living in Moldova that owns a trucking company here in the U.S. hauling military freight. Just every single
But
How
person.
does that even happen? Why is there no verification process for the? I mean, basically, if you've got a hazmat license and you got a TWIC card, you can pick up DoD freight, correct? What other kind of verification is being done?
You're
To get
technically
that?
supposed to be like to get access onto the base. You have to be
gotta be
at least
American
A
citizen.
U.S. Yeah, U.S.
Mhm.
citizen or green
So is
card
anybody
holder.
verifying that?
Yes, now I mean, but
If you have a CDL, but they're basically saying that you're an American citizen, right?
yeah, what we're seeing a lot is a lot of these loads that get brokered out, they might have a driver who can't speak English or isn't a U.S. citizen, so they don't get access. They can't get access onto the base.
Well,
On the
So
and
then they
base,
so
right.
so
they change drivers, right?
yeah, so the way they have to change driver, if you go on Facebook and you do like open quote, deliver to base, close quote, there are post after post of people saying, hey, I got a driver trying to get into Fort Dix, New Jersey, or Anniston, Alabama.
Yeah,
And
so they just switch it. They just have somebody come in and take the truck and trailer in there,
yeah,
or
Yep.
or unhook or whatever they do, and then they come out, and then the illegal driver gets back in the truck and takes
yep.
it to delivery.
Either
Mhm.
through public posts, which is really stupid, public posts on social media or private Telegram groups. They'll have like entire, and that's the other thing I think FMCSA needs to get more savvy on is the social media aspect of this. These guys have entire invisible underground networks in which they're moving freight around and hiring drivers and buying and
It's
selling
unbelievable.
MCs.
Mhm.
And I think besides the freight fraud task force, either within that or like a whole separate thing, is having a social media wing that monitors activity
Mhm.
online that can track this stuff. If there's a Facebook group and some guy says, "Hey, I'm selling or I want to buy MC number blah blah blah," that company needs to be like immediately put on pause, audited, and then
Yeah,
because
what's the process right now for buying MCs? I mean, and
it's not illegal to buy to sell your company.
no, but what's the process? What's the vetting process?
None whatsoever. What they're mostly after are DOTs and MCs that haul Amazon relay freight. 'Cause that's their bread and butter. And
Right.
most of these guys, when they get in, they don't run very safe. They get shut down, and then they want to buy a new one. So a lot of these companies were started during COVID. You started a trucking company around 2020 to 2022, and you hauled maybe one or two Amazon loads, and you're still in the relay system, and you just really haven't done anything with it. Your inbox and your phone are just blowing up daily right now from people saying, "I want to buy your MC. I want to buy your MC," and they're offering. I've seen as low as 18,000 up to 40,000, depending on what your authority is and how good it looks on paper. I think 2 3 weeks ago, FMCSA finally put out a notice saying, "Hey, don't do that. There are proper channels for selling your company. You need to go through the proper channels. If you're doing this like underground black market kind of stuff, we're shutting you down." But how they're going about doing that and finding the companies, I don't know. They're not too public with that stuff yet. But yeah, it's every single day. Every day you go on Facebook and you just type in MC for sale, and there's thousands of groups that are constantly every single day buying, selling, and trading MCs.
One thing I wanted to ask you before we start winding down is, and it's kind of how our conversation started at the show with what Ryan's doing over at GenLogs.
Yeah.
I really like his program, what he's got going. I think he's way ahead of the game on what he's trying to do. With what Ryan's doing, what do you think about him even getting bigger with it, because I think it's better off in his hands than in the government's. But how we have air traffic controls, right? And I know that's the most worst job in the country, but that should be something that's more regulated. I mean, all trucks should be monitored, and then internally monitor these drivers. The more information we have, the better. I just
Yeah,
wanted your thoughts on that.
yeah. GenLogs is it's like Batman level tech.
Hmm.
Ryan was very generous in giving myself and Danielle an account with them, and that helps us a lot with tracking down a lot of these carriers. Because when we were given all this information on the DoD stuff, we verified it all through GenLogs. We saw that this company was given 200 loads, so we should see at least a handful of their trucks somewhere on the interstates. Zero activity, and that's how we were popping these guys. Is any company that
Wow.
was given dozens or hundreds of loads, we would run their MC or DOT through GenLogs and find activity. And some we found, but most zero activity whatsoever. I see GenLogs only getting better and better as time goes on.
Well, they're going to get better because they're going to be working with ReadyF soon. So they're going to
Yeah,
get a lot better.
yeah. And law enforcement guys I've talked to, so in Indiana, there's a couple of high profile wrecks back in January and February. A lot of the investigations that they're doing, they're using GenLogs, search carriers, etc. But it doesn't do like real time data monitoring. So a lot of people with like the privacy concerns are a little they're jumping the gun on that. But most law enforcement guys I talk to, they like GenLogs, but it isn't mobile friendly. So if they have a truck pulled over, it's kind of difficult for them to like take a picture of the truck and look up the information on their phone. So I hope Ryan's team gets some
Not
kind
for
of
very long.
yeah. I hope they
Yeah,
get some
we're
kind
gonna
of
fix
mobile
that.
mobile
Yeah.
thing going on. But that's what
Yeah.
DOT in a lot of states like Indiana are doing right now with search carriers, because you can take a photo of the truck, upload it to search carriers, and it scans everything, and you've got their entire network right there on the spot. I talked with a guy from Customs and Border Control a few months back, and I told him, the problem you guys have is, you're a checkpoint, and you've got 500 to 1,000 trucks that come to you every single day. How do you determine which trucks you need to look at with a fine tooth comb and which ones you need to just give like a quick scan over? I said, you need to start using the search carrier site, because if you pull a truck in and you see 5 red flags on that carrier, that's a truck you need to start taking a closer look at. And so
Mhm.
that's kind of what I've been doing behind the scenes, is really pushing these tools over to law enforcement, because it makes their jobs a lot easier.
Before we wrap up here, you want to give out your socials, how, another carrier that might want to get in on something to let you know.
And also talk about what you're focused on next with Shady Freight.
Yeah, so I'm trying to get into like the expert witness territory. I've been taking all kinds of certification courses through DOT and what do they call it? Their Transportation Safety Management Institute. It's one of those things where guys I've talked to that are in this space, they always tell me, once you get your first case and you like knock it out of the park, the work never ends. You're just going to get more and more offers. So if you
Mhm.
are a lawyer or you're dealing with a case and you need a carrier audited or have their books gone over, hit me up. You can find me on Twitter at Super Trucker.
Well, Justin, we really appreciate you coming on. We appreciate you keeping it real with us. This episode was brought to you by Ready App and Gray Cross. Justin Holden, you want to thank our
Yeah.
sponsor?
Other Justin.
Yeah, another one. Definitely want to thank our sponsors. We'll start with Gray Cross. They are a nonprofit that help trucking families through crisis. If you've lost your loved one on the road, Gray Cross steps in, will help with, anything and everything from food to funeral cost, anything just to help. If so, please go to the site. Don't If you can donate $1, $5, $10, whatever, it's very appreciated. And then, of course, our main sponsor, Ready App, we definitely want to thank them. The driver onboarding and verification platform, helping to bring transparency and trust into trucking. Our truck driver listeners out there, definitely go check it out. The driver passport is going to be essential moving forward. So go check that out. That's ready-app.com.
Awesome. Yep. And if you liked our show today, make sure you subscribe, share it. You can find us on iHeartRadio, Spotify, YouTube. And Justin, we really appreciate you coming on.
Mm-hmm.
And
Most definitely.
for everyone listening, drive safe